My name is Carrie Clark. I'm the president and CEO of Allegiance. Allegiance is a fast-growing, venture-backed, big data software company based in South Jordan, Utah. So I'm delighted to be here today.
My name is Rich Nelson. I want to first thank Brad Westwood for reaching out and attempting to drive some relevancy to history, and applaud your efforts to get this conference repositioned this way. Thank you very much. I also want to share my great admiration for the group here. Each has played and continues to play a significant role in why Utah really matters in this country and around the globe. I head up an organization, a community called the Utah Technology Council, have for the last 15 years. My predecessor, Peter Genero, ran it for the first 9 years and was one of the early thought leaders of what would happen if we had an industry association, and came back with a business plan with 39 or 40 others, as I recall. And he'll tell that story, I'm sure. Utah has a spectacular story when it comes to the innovation community that we have here and what's currently going on. We're not fully telling that story. And that's one reason we have an industry group that's working closely with the industry. It's reached out over the last 10 years, and it uses advocacy as one of the things that it does. We just found that we could accomplish so much more quickly to impact the industry by doing that. And we'll talk a little more about that, but huge admiration for this group, especially Peter here.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be here. I've been away from Utah for 15 years since the day I turned the reins over to Richard here, and it's an absolute pleasure to be back. In fact, it's the first time I've worn a suit in 15 years. I woke up 3 nights ago and said, my God, I got to get dressed up, and I wonder if the suit will still fit. I had it in the closet in the bag. I got it out and it still fits, so here I am. And the shoes, I could put those on as well. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here and trying to share a bit about a period of time in the history of the IT industry here in the state of Utah. It was during this period of the 90s that Utah became aware and it possessed a fledgling IT industry, that the industry paid employees nearly twice the average Utah non-agricultural wage, and it was environmentally clean and thus very worthy of being supported and enabled to grow. Now, as our conference program outlines a bit about me, I would add that after 33 years of leading technology and financial businesses in their startup growth and frequently as a corporate doctor, I arrived in Utah in 1986 to be involved with yet another turnaround, that is, helping to take a company to its next level. My company was YCAT Systems, a pioneer developer and provider of computer-based K-12 education and training systems for industry then located in Utah County, subsequently bought by IBM. My contribution to YCAT completed during 1988, and having fallen in love with Utah and realizing I no longer wanted to move, which is what you have to do when you're in turnaround business, because the next turnaround is never in the same town, same state, same country, I decided to seek a position here in Utah. So in the course of knocking on doors around with various IT companies, I repeatedly heard the same lament from their leaders. In essence, they would say, I would like convenient opportunities to meet my Utah peers, to net with them, to market to them, to learn from them, and be supported or support them. My company needs a resource in Utah where my employees can obtain continuing and advanced education relevant to their and my company's needs and opportunities. There are far too sources of capital. Our education institutions are not producing relevant, work-ready graduates which meet my firm's needs. And lastly, it feels like the state's regulations, taxes, and support of economic development and education may not be competitive compared with nearby states. All of them acknowledge that these unfulfilled needs were beyond any individual firm to make much headway. solving or realizing. So in my past, having been a member and leader of various industry associations, I learned that through aggregating and representing many firms in an industry, assessing their needs and developing and producing appropriate programs and initiatives, there could be sustained progress toward meeting the aforementioned needs. Thus, starting in 1989, I determined to form an association, and with a lot of help from the then Department of Economic Development of the state, a number of IT execs and support organizations, through a task force, we undertook to plan and implement what became UITA, the Utah Information Technologies Association. And its headquarters, which we called our intergalactic headquarters, I think Jack was the one that coined that, was in my basement for the first 4 years. So yet another IT, another startup in Utah. So I'm almost done, so sorry about that. To bookend the 9 years of my watch, state and independent survey estimates of the number of IT firms in 1991 were around 200, and the industry revenues of about 800 million. At the end of 1998, which is nominally 9 years later, there were some 2,400 firms, and note the word I said 2,400 because nobody knew exactly how many there were, and the industry's revenues were about $7 billion. Also, at the end of 1998, UITA's membership had grown to about 450 organizations made up of IT companies, support organizations, the state was a member, etc. So please know that it is these organizations and collaborators with UITA which made Utah's IT industry what it was at the end of my watch, even though some kindly attributed the growth and success to UITA. We had really nothing to do with it other than being the catalyst. So I look forward to answering questions about my experience. I'm going to take the jacket off, is that okay?
My name is Jack Sunderledge, and I've had a longer career in IT than I care to admit, but my career does extend back to the 1960s, selling mainframes for Burroughs Corporation. After a period of years, Burroughs merged with Sperry to form Unisys, and then about a year after that I made a change and joined a company called Digital Equipment, the mini-computer manufacturer out of Boston area. Digital was then acquired by Compaq, who was then acquired by Hewlett-Packard, so I changed jobs once, but had the opportunity to work for 5 different companies in the process of that. And then had a brief stint as the CEO of a small software company here in Utah called Content Watch. And my involvement in the community has been, as Peter acknowledged, I was one of the founding sponsors with Digital Equipment. At the time Peter launched it, and I remember those meetings were all in your basement, Peter. And Sid, I would have to say to you that he did pass the cookies around on the tray, and we were so small that we actually got a couple of cookies at that time. And Peter was the right man to get UITA launched in Utah. And then was fortunate enough to continue to be on the board at the time that we made the selection for Rich Nelson. And we got that down to 3 finalists, and we really did determine that Rich is the guy that had the fire in the belly and that could take this organization to the next level. So we've had that opportunity. Just quickly, did have a chance to work with Governor Huntsman in founding the World Trade Center Utah, and was board chairman there for 5 years, and then served on the U-Star board, governing authority for the first couple of years of that. So good to be with you today.
Thank you all. Obviously, we have a very prestigious panel here, and obviously the context of this session is the fact that Utah's high-tech industry represents over 14.3% of the state's total payroll and has an over economic impact to Utah exceeding $7 billion. So we've come a long way, but what I'd like to do is start off at the beginning generally, and Pete, I'll send this question to you first, and then anyone else who would like to respond. What is it about Utah that cultivated what we now see as a developing and rich tech area?
I credit 2 people for bringing that to Utah. That's David Evans and Ivan Sutherland. They were attracted to the University of Utah, and I don't know who was that recruited them, but they were leading computer science researchers at the time. They came to Utah, and The people they attracted subsequently to their program came not only for their names and their talent, but they came for the skiing. When I heard John Warnick speak on the history of computer science in Utah, John Warnick, the founder of Adobe, and he was one of those people that came to Utah to be with David and Ivan. He was saying that practically all the students underneath him, they came for the name, but the skiing was the clincher. So I think that's a good argument for protecting our natural resources because it gave birth to the technology industry in Utah. David Evans and Ivan Sutherland were pioneers in computer graphics, and subsequently they attracted a base of talent that went on to found things like Netscape, Silicon Graphics, went off to work for Microsoft, do a lot of work there, and of course Evans and Sutherland, the graphics company itself that started here in Salt Lake City, where I got my first technology job, and got my deepest exposure to the internet and what inspired me to start my internet company. What was disheartening about Evans and Sutherland is by the time I got there, Ivan Sutherland had passed on, and David Evans had one foot in the grave. He was not all there, and he had Alzheimer's, and he'd walk up and down the halls and say hello to people, which was very intimidating because, you know, here's this computer legend come to life. And but Evans and Sutherland ran to a certain point and couldn't see the future. So a lot of the people that came out of Evans and Sutherland went off to start companies like NVIDIA and ATI and the big graphics companies that are out there producing chips today, and many of the game companies as well. But I think that could have been in Evans and Sutherland's hands if they had better leadership and foresight.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on generally what is it about Utah that cultivated the high-tech industry?
Well, I can chime in. I think that last year I was raising money for my company, so we ended up closing a $32 million round in January. But I met with 76 venture firms, and most of them said to me, we love investing in Utah because there is a talented workforce there, that there are, people love to be there, they love to work together, and it's just nice people. And when I talk to other companies that we do business with, they say, what is going on with you in Utah? Because there seems to be all these great companies coming out of there. If you think about the heritage of the state, and the whole beehive state thing, is that we like to work, and we have some wonderful universities, so I get a lot of my talent from universities that have pretty healthy research departments and have parents who came from a pedigree of Evans and Sutherland or from Novell or from WordPerfect or from any of these companies that were here when Peter was running UEDA, and they're making sure that their children are educated, they like to stay here, and it's a pretty fun place to work.
Ed Catmull is the founder of Pixar, and I heard Ed speak recently. He's written a book called Creativity, Inc. If you haven't read the book, it's one that I think you would thoroughly enjoy, and I see an acknowledgement there. But he spoke a lot about Ivan Sutherland, Pete, your comments, and David Evans, and how they fostered really a collaborative, supportive environment in the computer science department at the university. And he attributed those two gentlemen to launch a lot of successful careers of people. I want to just read one excerpt from his book, and he went on to talk about much of the University of Utah Computer Science Department's research was funded by ARPA, which had been created to respond to Sputnik. One of ARPA's proudest achievements was linking universities with something called ARPANET, which would eventually evolve into the internet. The first 4 nodes on ARPANET were at Stanford Research, UCLA, University of California at Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. So he has some wonderful memories of that, and he said he's really trying at Pixar to replicate the environment that he experienced at the University of Utah. And it wasn't so much about just creating a successful company, but to create a sustainable, creative environment. Just a couple comments on it. Also, he talked about how he often slept on the floor of the computer room to maximize his time on the computer. And he said, so did many of my fellow graduate students. And I think it's a great story about what happened in those early days at the university.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Want to go on the next question? I'm good.
No, if you have a comment, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to recognize Dave Evans. He was the first chairman of UITA. But the story leading up to his becoming chairman, I think, is something that might be of some interest to in the context of history. Evans and Sutherland was known, maybe outside the company more than inside the company, as an insular company. They did not foster collaboration outside of their own company. The perception was reality. When I first met, I was introduced to Dave Evans by an attorney whose firm represented Evans and Sutherland, and he looked at me and said, "Peter, there's no way you can pull this off. First of all, we're not supportive of the concept that you're proposing. We undertake to be a part of, and we're just not going to be in a position to be helpful." And he gave me his reasons. His reasons were we don't want our employees stolen. And if we have a collaborative environment, other companies will become aware of us and our employees, and we're more likely to lose them. Well, in the intervening year and a half, from when I met him until we formed UITA, it was formed in his boardroom. 40 people from the industry and supporting organizations were on this task force, as mentioned earlier. Dave Evans was not one of those people, but he hosted the formation meeting for UITA in his boardroom. So in the intervening year and a half, he changed his attitude, his mind. He got in my car and went with me for 2 months around to talk to the leaders of IT companies and solicit them to become founding members or augment the founding members of the association personally. And when I took him down to WordPerfect to meet with Alan Ashton, and we had lunch in the lunchroom, many of the graduates from the University of Utah were now working for WordPerfect at the time, and one after another they would come up to the table and pay respects to Dave Evans. Just a little story.
Thank you so much. Corinne, coming from a software perspective, what technology companies in the past 30 years, in your opinion, have had the biggest impact in shaping our current technology climate?
Well, I have a bias because I was part of the Novell WordPerfect wave. So I mentioned earlier I was at Novell for 14 years. And I left my job at the library to take a job at Novell. And in my 20s, I had responsibilities that most people would never have in their 20s. And the company, I worked for Ray Norda, and the company was growing so dramatically globally. And we were making partnerships with some of the largest companies in the world. And at our keynotes, our BrainShare conference, we had Steve Jobs many times, Steve Ballmer, Jim Canabino. You think of some historical figures in the space. So if I think about, since I was in that pool, if you think about the economic impact that Novell and WordPerfect had, not only in Utah County but in the state, I was trying to figure out last night what the salaries would total up to, and then the impact where the DNA from those two companies is now in senior positions at Microsoft, at Google, at Facebook, at Twitter, at some of the largest, fastest growing companies in the world. So I think we not only have an opportunity at a very young age for a lot of people to have big grown-up jobs and make some serious adult money, but that we also made networks and connections. So when they had my press release for when I took the job as the CEO of the company, which was a really big deal for me, I had a quote from Eric Schmidt and John Thompson, two historical figures in the software industry, and people said to me, "Who are you?" I'm like Forrest Gump. I'm in every picture, but I'm no one in particular. But we got to meet so many cool people, and if you look at the not only the salaries, but the investments from the money that was made from those two companies in fostering education and computer science programs. I live right next to Bruce Bastian, and he was one of the founding members of WordPerfect. And to see the investments that the leaders of those companies have made. Earlier we heard about Ray Norda. I have a special respect for their vision and their foresight because I benefit from that. and I can hire in a very vibrant economy because a lot of those people came from those two companies.
Thank you. Richard, why is Utah called Silicon Slopes?
Well, there's a critical mass here. It's certainly a takeoff from Silicon Valley. It's really been driven by Josh James and his vision, and so many of us have bought into that. He was trying to recruit talent from out of state. He couldn't find it here in the senior ranks, and if they came here and it didn't work out, or they were here for a period of time and they looked around, it was a hard sell to get them to come here if they were only going to go to Omniture. And so over time, he spearheaded that, funded it. There's still 4 of us on that board. It's a vision of this innovation community and critical mass and being able to do hard things, and now having, just on the tech side, over 5,000 companies with a large percentage of the state payroll. But we owe a lot to Josh James, frankly, for continuing to embrace that and drive that.
Thank you. Peter Genero, what were some of the major connections and synergies that helped propel the industry during the 1990s?
I have 4 of them, and I'm not going to touch on all 4 of them, but I think
Go
the
ahead.
most important one, well, not most important one, they're all important, but the connection between the industry and the education community. I mentioned that one of the laments that I heard from IT execs in the early 1990s was that the output of the education system in terms of graduates were not really adequate to be seriously taken by any of the firms as to become employees. The very first person that listened to that was Frank Budd, who was then the president of Salt Lake Community College, and they had a program where they were teaching COBOL, Fortran, languages that long had since become obsolete. They were cranking out students and graduates that couldn't find a job because there weren't anybody that was using those languages any longer. So he came to me one day and drove over from Salt Lake Community College to the basement of my house and sat down, the president of Salt Lake Community College, and says, "We want to make a difference in this area. Would you get a group of IT execs together with my curriculum committee in the IT area and advise them as to what would be relevant and useful?" And they did. We collaborated with them, did that. They changed their curriculum. The next year, every one of their once they implemented those new courses, every one of their graduates got hired. Okay. And that got the attention of the education community, and we had most of the other major education institutions, including the Applied Technology Center network that you have here in the state, had members on our board, came to meetings, sat down with our people, and the rest is history. The education community has crept up and is now producing, as I understand it, much more work-ready, able, interesting, hireable people. That's a collaboration and synergy that was very important, and Frank Budd gets the credit for having started that.
Put an asterisk on it. We still have thousands of open jobs in the industry. It is our #1 issue and has been for 7 years. We still need alignment of our K-12 system. We're working actively to change that. We're exporting jobs from $60,000 to $160,000 elsewhere by our companies not being able to find the talent. So it's a very serious issue. I used to call it desperate. It'd be interesting to hear what Crean has to say about that. One of our CEOs the other day said, "No, it's not desperate, it's brutal. We're literally stealing talent from each other. We need to really solve this." That's the issue that's holding us back. Again, it's no longer about startups, although we care deeply about startups. We're extremely good at startups. It's now about growing these companies. But it's all about talent now.
Thank you. Jack, there's been a lot of press on Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma. and about how the disruptive technology impacts major computer vendors like the largest computer manufacturer, Digital Equipment Corporation, and many others as early as the 1980s. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the examples that Clay Christensen writes about is the rise and fall of digital equipment. Just as a little bit of intro, I may want to offer a couple of quotes here that some of you may have heard, but our founder of Digital Equipment, Ken Olson, was once quoted in 1977 that there is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. The other quotes, Thomas Watson, who was the chairman of IBM back in 1943, said, "I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers." And one of the engineers at IBM said, "But what is it good for?" as he was talking about the microchip, which had recently been developed on their Advanced Computing Systems division at IBM. So, the other great quote is, "We don't like their sound, and guitar music is on the way out." This is Decca Recording Company rejecting the Beatles in 1962. But the situation with digital equipment, they launched the mini computer, and at the time IBM found this to be just disruptive technology, really tended to ignore the mini computer market. After all, IBM said, our customers don't want that, and why would we want to build something that has such lower profit margins? And so they totally ignored that, and during that era, Digital Equipment, Data General, Wang, and others emerged and became very dominant in the mini computer line. For all the genius that Ken Olson had at Digital Equipment in bringing computing closer to the individual through departmental computing and so on, with mini computers, as indicated in his quote, he chose to ignore what was emerging with the personal computer. And so digital had a great rise, but they were the ones that took the hardest fall after that occurred. The other phenomenon that was occurring there was that there was open systems were coming into the marketplace, and an operating system called Unix. And Ken Olson was also notoriously quoted as saying Unix is snake oil. And what he was really suggesting was they were selling it in the marketplace as being very portable. And he was out to prove that it really wasn't 100% portable, but the reality was it was portable enough to get its legs and be quite successful. So while the Digital Equipment Corporation was trying to keep the VMS and the VAX line going, they were paying a little bit of attention to the open systems, but they just never really addressed it the way that they needed to, and of course was the demise of the company.
Well, as historians, we're all familiar with certain topics create red-hot rhetoric. And his use of the term disruptive technology has certainly created that kind of dialogue recently. How does that term play out in what's going on in the high-tech industry today? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, we teach part of our culture is we embrace disruption, and that we move toward anxiety, because it's an opportunity for growth, it's an opportunity to change things, it's an opportunity to look for a better way. So one of our partners that we're working with is 140 years old, and they have a dress code where you can't wear jeans or tennis shoes. Now, if you come to my shop, my guys are in shower shoes and shorts, and I'm pretty sure they don't shower. So, and they love working for me because I feed them every single meal. But to put these two organizations together, it's unbelievable. So as I talked to their chairman, who's a billionaire, he said, "How have you been able to adapt and innovate so quickly?" And I said, "It's because we embrace disruption and that we move toward it, and we're students and we're resilient and we're looking." And so they're trying to learn from us, but we're also trying to learn from them because they've made quite a bit of money in the work that they do. But I think if you look at the generation, so I have 2 sons, these kids are different than we are. They are digital natives. They grew up in an economy where knowledge is their currency. They don't want to own a bunch of stuff. They want access to information, and they work differently. Their work is where they are. They don't need a computer. They need their phone, and I don't think they'll ever go to an office. I think that they'll just be this mobile workforce. And so as much as we can adapt, and you probably see it with your company too, that you have to be able to embrace these young, bright minds because they're not going to work the way that we worked growing up.
Thank you. That's another connecting point that maybe our director was thinking of putting this conference together. Historians call that deconstruction, and in the high-tech industry you call it disruption, but it's basically the same thing. Pete Ashdown, what tech innovations that have come to Utah do you think play a role in the current state of what's happening today, both nationally and within the state?
Come out of Utah?
Yes.
Well, of course, the thing I mentioned earlier with computer graphics and Jack mentioned Ed Catmull came out of the computer graphics program at the University of Utah and started Pixar, is one of the biggest. Certainly, Novell's contributions to networking, and even though that they weren't the first to embrace TCP/IP, which is what the internet is based on, they certainly made other innovations in how to move data around, how to store data. There is right now there's a significant supercomputing program at the University of Utah. There's a supercomputing conference that rotates around in Salt Lake City. Is now one of the cities that it rotates into. It was here in 2012, and I think it's coming back again in 2016. So we still remain an active hub of innovation, not just in new .coms that come up on the internet, but actual technologies that rotate out and flourish into other businesses.
Thank you. Peter Genero, what was a significant unanticipated outcome related to the economic downturn occurring during the 90s that may impact our discussion today?
Anecdote. Good, thank you. Sometime in the 90s, and somebody in the audience will be able to tell me the dates or remind the audience the dates, it doesn't really probably matter, but sometime during the 90s, Utah experienced a hiccup in its economy, as well as changing technology trends, which conspired to result in downsizing, closing, and otherwise disruptions to the IT industry. For Novell and WordPerfect were caught up in during that period and various changes that were profound. Now, popular belief prevailed that such laid-off employees and disrupted entrepreneurs wanting to stay in the industry would have no choice but to leave the state to find their next job, or if they wanted to stay in Utah, to change industries. Due to cultural and other motivations relatively unique to Utah, a larger than expected number of the affected people chose to stay in Utah and in the IT industry. And the way they did it was to start a new business or join a startup or some other relatively young entrepreneurial organization. The result was that the IT industry in Utah had a relatively soft landing during that period, and the number of IT firms rose remarkably, both during the hiccup period and immediately afterwards.
Thank you. Richard Nelson, help orient us a little bit to what's happening in Utah today. Tell us what the Fund of Funds is, USTAR, STEM Action Center, and how that impacts high tech.
So over the last 12 years, things have fundamentally changed. It really started with the downturn in the industry called the bubble, 2000, 2003. And we as the community, we as UITA, now Utah Technology Council, we weren't relevant. We didn't matter. We did a lot of things, but frankly, we were nice to have. And so we reorganized. We went back and asked the industry, what are your most three pressing issues? Off the chart, May of 2002, through a series of group meetings with CEOs. Number one was capital. That was their issue. And they basically said to this industry organization that was trying to rethink itself, so that we could stay relevant, Brad, is we need capital. We need early stage capital. We are a flyover zone, and so we put together a group of about 6 or 7 that really spent some cycles. Will West and a number of others. Will had raised at the time over $200 million for 3 successful startups, none of it in Utah. And we went to the legislature as a new advocacy group. We built a case with the legislature that if they would give us access to $100 million of tax credits, not taxpayers' cash, but tax credits, we would fundamentally change the capital structure of the state. They trusted us because 150 from the industry, mostly CEOs, came in waves during that legislative session in 2003. Complex bill, hasn't been replicated any other place in the country. Utah, at that point, started to reinvent itself around the much-needed early-stage capital. And there's no other state that's come as far as we have. That was called the Utah Fund of Funds. It's put money out to 28 venture funds and private equity funds that we attracted mostly from out of state. Some were here. And we put out $121 million of real money. We borrowed against those tax credits. In fact, we had such a good story, we went back to the legislature and asked for $200 million more. And we promised them we would never come back and ask those tax credits to be cashed in, which would obviously cost us as taxpayers money. So far, so good. 10 years down the road, it looks like that we won't have to have any of those cashed in. The net is it has fundamentally changed the capital structure of the states. It was the over 200 additional venture and private equity firms that came here, discovered what we had, discovered the allegiances and many others, and we as the funds turned them down, but they discovered something much more important than the $5 million that they could get from the Fund of Funds. So that was a significant turning point. That was number one thing that has fundamentally changed the state. Number two is U-Star. In 2006, 3 groups got together, the Salt Lake Chamber, the Economic Development Corporation of Utah, and obviously us as the technology leadership in the state. And we passed a bill that basically said we need $400 million to create an innovation framework, is the way I look at it. Long term, to go out and recruit all-star professors from all over the world to also bring their teams and their funding here. And that has been very successful. No one else in the country, others have tried to replicate that. We have 2 major facilities, buildings that have been built as a result of that. It gave those universities an ability to start to work on creating 421, I think, new companies and 123,000 jobs over a 30-year period is what we committed to. So we're on track. It's really remarkable. That is another major engine of economic prosperity that we were able to put into place. And then just recently, I commented about talent. Talent is our issue.
I think the key thing for our state is to continue to nurture an environment where we can really allow the discovery-driven person to drive down I-15 and say, I can make money at that. And then also nurture the individuals that say, once the company's been formed, I can organize this and grow it into something very successful.
Thank you. I'd sure like to thank the panel today. It's been a very stimulating and educational and informative session. Let's show our appreciation for the